We have a Saboteur aboard.
With the missile and the launcher assembled and painted in the last video, it was now time to create a small fictional scene of sabotage gone wrong. As mentioned previously, this is the subject of a group build, so be sure to stick around at the end of the video to check out some of the other amazing builds that made the table. A figure brings any scene to life, and I'd been toying with many ideas with this one, but settled on a couple of figures from live resin. The sculpts are really lovely, but they comprised of many tiny pieces that were difficult to determine exactly where they should be fitting. Unfortunately, there were no instructions for these figures, at least that I could find. The faces looked identical also to my eye, which wasn't ideal, but it wasn't a deal breaker either. After the pieces were removed from the moulding gates and tidied up with a sharp scalpel, they were assembled using a super glue. I followed the renderings on the boxes as best I could for some of the placements, however, some of the elements were a guess at best. The poses were pretty good, but with the story I had in mind, I was needing to modify these figures a little, especially the fellow that was kneeling down. His hand had been sculpted into the gun, so that needed to be removed with a sharp scalpel. The arm needed to then be straightened, so that was clipped in half, and a couple of holes were drilled in each half using a small twist drill. I get a lot of people asking me about these twist drills, and this set is from Hobbyist Haven, and I can highly recommend them. And if you'd like to get a set for yourself, I've added a link in the notes as well as a 10% discount code for you to give them a try. A small piece of copper wire is then glued into those holes. This will give me stability and strength in the joint and allow me to fine-tune the position of that arm somewhat. Once happy with the positions, the glue was left to set and hold everything in place. The same process was used for the positioning of the head, as I wanted to redirect the way the figures would be looking. Because I'd removed the hand from the gun, I had to use an aftermarket substitute. It is surprising how much difference a well-sculpted hand can make to your figure and the ability it has to direct attention or tell a story. There are a number of manufacturers sculpting these now, so be sure to keep an eye out for them for your next figure build. The hand I'm using is from Royal Models and should work perfectly for what I'm trying to achieve.
I know that hand.
A two-part Tamiya sculpting putty is then twisted together until the colour of that putty becomes unified. That is then used to fill in around that copper wire and the spaces between those modified joints. The putty is quite rigid, but should allow me to confidently sculpt it using a silicone brush and the tip of a toothpick. I'm trying to integrate the putty into the existing folds and shapes of that original sculpt. My sculpting is pretty rough, but it will be good enough for what I need it to be. I used the same techniques to create the neck section of that figure also. Being a fictional scene, I could paint these figures any way I wanted, but I wanted to keep it as plausible as I could, so I based the camouflage on a modern Multicam pattern. Multicam and variations of it have proven to be effective and have been adopted pretty much globally, especially by Special Forces units, and so the trick now was how I'd go about painting it. I began with a base coat of Vallejo color US Army Tank Crew. A small amount of paint is placed on the wet palette. A wet palette is essentially a tub with a wet sponge and a piece of baking paper on top. The water migrates through that paper and will keep the paint wetter for longer, which will allow me to create different colors and mixes and be able to access them for a few days without it drying out. The base color of the uniform is achieved in around 3 light coats. Don't waste your time trying to get these colors down in one go, it just will not happen. The lighter tones in that scheme were achieved using a US highlight color, and again from the Vallejo range of acrylics. By keeping the paint wet with a drop of water, I'm able to brush paint that pattern using a fine brush. I'm trying to work around the shapes of that uniform and trying to apply the pattern in a random but a structured way, and that's harder than it sounds. For the smaller spots and shapes, I chose a dark olive green and a winter tanker color from Vallejo again. I tried as best I could to use this pattern as my roadmap, but it's easy to get lost along the way and paint what you think should be there rather than what you see. And every so often I found it helpful to put the figure down and rest my eyes and start again with a clear head. I used the dark olive green rather than a black to better tie in with the other colours, and then the off-white spots and splashes were finally painted on to complement that scheme. Was it perfect? No. Was it close enough? Well, it certainly was for me. I'd usually paint the flesh parts of the figure first, because if you don't get those right, the figure is never going to work. But in this case, trying to paint that camouflage was the thing that was the most daunting part of this paintwork for me. I then painted the foundation layers for the flesh tone using a Citadel colour called Bugman's Glow. The warm dark flesh tones are perfect for the shades and will complement the next colour up, which is Cadian Flesh Tone. The Cadian flesh is then painted over the majority of that surface area. The whole debate around painting eyes is a conversation for another day, but I like doing it where I can. I begin with a light flesh colour and block in where the eyes would sit. I find using white in this situation is too stark, and the light flesh works much better. The pupil is then created with a dot of dark brown paint. Again, I'm not being too precise, but I'm making sure the positions are at least symmetrical. I can then go back with the flesh tones and start cutting away at the eye whites and start to refine the shape of the eyes. Again, they're not perfect, but good enough for what I'm hoping for. The flesh can then be highlighted with that Cadian flesh mixed with a light flesh colour. This is where the wet palette comes in really handy. Keeping the paint wet and building up coverage over areas like the nose and the cheekbones starts to bring the face to life and bring character to that figure. The gear around the figure was then painted using similar techniques to what I'd used on the uniform. Base colour and then building up the highlights over the creases and the folds, and it was then time to apply an oil wash to add that little more depth to the figure. Shadow brown is selectively applied through the deepest recesses on the figure, and I like using oil paints for these washes because it's easy to control and manipulate it if you're not happy with how it's looking. Be mindful that oils always dry a little differently to how they look when they first go down, so be patient with the results and reapply or correct where necessary. A VMS matte varnish seals the figure, however, I find it also smooths the look of the paintwork and presents the figure in a more presentable way. As I alluded to in the first part of this video, I too had been working on the base mount for this launcher after studying reference. My design skills are something I'm always looking to improve, so I look for any excuse to design something I can. The basic shapes and the hatch were designed in Tinkercad and printed on my 3D printer. For anyone interested, these files will be available on my Patreon page for my killer kangaroos. And while I'm on Patreon, thank you to my latest kangaroos, Paul Dorival and Lucas Kashuba. Massive thanks to you guys and all of my kangaroos for their generous support, as it helps me bring you this content on a regular basis. And of course, a big shout out to my wombat warriors. Join us on the page and let's grow this community together. My original plan was to create an elevated platform for the base, so I used the hot wire cutter to cut a piece of foam to size. I then applied styrene to the edges using a 3M mounting film and trimmed it to size, but when I looked at the way the launcher looked all squared up on it, it just looked boring and bland. I found by twisting it slightly and playing with the angles, I was able to create a far more dynamic and interesting display. I further added to the angles on the base by fitting guardrails I'd designed and printed earlier. The rails add an extra level of geometry, and by having them spill off the sides of the base helps create even more focus and movement in that scene. It's worth noting I masked the edges of that base and primed it in a Mr. Surfacer black and built up the dark ghost grey as my foundation layer. The vast expanse of that single colour was looking so stark, so I did what I did on the launcher and I applied a basic pre-shade using IJN grey. It was my hope that the modelling and irregular finish would translate through the next layer of the grey that would follow. The dark ghost grey is then mixed to around 50-50 mix of paint to thinner and applied over that base. By keeping that paint thin, I'm able to allow some of that shading to show through the top coat and add variation in the finish. I found trying to do this directly over the black base was just not working, hence I chose to go the pre-shade route and reapply that colour. I had to try and give the expansive grey some life, so I began with some light sponge chipping around the hatch and the guardrails. Just like I did on the maintenance hatch in the first video, I'm keeping this subtle and refined so it will only be noticeable on close inspection. I'm trying to add dimension to that grey and help create some life and wear in the parts. I could then apply my enamel washes around the shapes so it would mirror the look that I achieved on that launcher. Keeping the paint well thinned with a white spirit usually ensures it will run around the details freely, although sometimes it does need some help to move around. A little mess is okay because it's easy enough to clean and manipulate with a brush moistened with white spirit. The next trick in the kit bag was to use a speckling technique to speckle salt streaks, which is a light grey, almost white enamel paint mix. The paint is heavily diluted with a white spirit and is speckled over the base by flicking the brush loaded with a mix against a toothpick. While the speckles are still wet, I can dab a sponge against the surface and further soften those speckles. I'm trying to create a model look the salt and seawater can leave on the surface of a ship. The benefit of that is it helps add another dimension, albeit subtle, to those grey elements on the base. It looked great, but it was a step I needed to repeat on some of the lower edges of that launcher so it would integrate into the base in a better way. To further enhance that rust, a touch of rust enamel paint was applied on some of the larger chips and then blended with a soft brush and white spirit. The launcher could then be glued in place. I twisted it slightly off center in order to add another angle and allow the viewer to get a glimpse into the internals of the pylon that I'd been working on. And now to the hero of the story, the Saboteur.
Saboteur!
I thought it would be a quirky twist to the story to have a bird sabotaging the saboteurs. I managed to source a file again from Colts 3D and printed a non-specific seabird. A small hole was drilled into its body and a fine rigging wire was glued in place and would act as a mounting wire for that figure. The bird was painted in acrylics and the wire was glued in place to have that bird suspended in the air about to swoop one of the soldiers. And finally, Greg Lester, world-renowned maritime modeler and a valued part of the Workbench Hobbies community, suggested a couple of empty vodka bottles in the belly of the pylon might make for a fun detail, and I couldn't have agreed more. And lucky enough, Mini Art have just the set. So a couple of empty vodka bottles are added to the scene to add that extra layer to the story. And be sure to check out Greg's work over at modelshipworld.com. He goes under the name of RGL. The soldiers were then fixed in place, and with that final touch, the scene was complete. A successful vignette should always tell a story, but more than that, the scene should have multiple layers to that story in which the viewer needs to uncover as they are looking over it. You don't need hundreds of complex elements to tell that story either. Often a well-sculpted pose or even a facial expression can be all that's required to tell a tale and direct the viewer to an unfolding story. I'd mentioned in the first part of this video about building out of my comfort zone, and in the second part of this series I doubled down on that discomfort. Modifying figures, painting the multicam and constructing a small vignette are all relatively new disciplines for me, but it has been a journey that I've really enjoyed. I think the thing I enjoyed about this whole project most was trying to get creative with this group build subject and develop a story around it. If you'd like to support this channel, then please consider joining me through my Patreon page, or if you'd prefer, you can always show your support at buymeacoffee.com. Details are in the notes below. Stick around at the end of the video and I'll take you through some of the other kits that made the table, and we'll have a chat to some of the participants of that build also. Remember guys, this is the greatest hobby in the world. Share it with your family, share it with your friends, and let's be proud of what we do. I'll see you again soon.
What about everyone else?
Tell us about the thought process of how you decided to...
First ever show that has 8 of those on the table.
Yeah, absolutely.
And probably the last one as well.
That's what we said, TAKOM. If the sales rep from TAKOM saw it, they'd have a fit. Didn't think they'd sold so many.
Yeah, well, my thought process was kind of displayed a slightly different way. So I went with base, like basically pretending it's a museum piece. I had a figure photographer, but I kind of chickened out of that one. And I supposed to like a stand with a little bit of a blurb with it as well, which I didn't get to it either.
And did you enjoy the build?
I definitely did enjoy the build.
What's the part you enjoyed the most?
Try to new technique with the concreting.
Yep.
That I watched on Night Shift.
Yep.
That was probably my favorite part of it. And then you could basically just chip whatever that you wanted to do. And I don't even think I used any kind of color reference that was offered. I literally just pick up a grey paint jar from the station.
Well, it looks
it's just,
it looks great, mate.
It was pretty good.
Congratulations on being part of the group build.
Thank you. Hopefully more to come through next year.
More to come. Thanks, mate.
Yeah, you're welcome.
All right, so I have Paul Lee, good mates, great modeller, prolific writer for the Modelling News. And
minor exaggerations, but I'll take them.
And a good mate. We've been coming to this show for probably the best part of 10 or 12 years, something like that.
Correct.
It's a weekend pilgrimage for us down to Wollongong. Tell me about your experiences with the missile, mate. I know you weren't too crash hot on the subject to start, but did you enjoy the builds?
That's funny because I seem to be the one who suggested this and getting absolutely hammered.
Is that right? I don't remember that.
Absolutely, I got hammered. Well, yeah, there are a lot of gaps in your memories when it comes to me getting hammered.
Completely full of gaps.
But I'm going to take credit for the most successful one so far.
Absolutely. Did you enjoy the build?
Yeah, it was. You know what? It was quite interesting. Just having a build that wasn't too time intensive. That made it quite a.
Yeah.
And I think that was what made this one successful.
Absolutely.
Is that it just was able to throw it together quickly and was fun because it was just something that we wouldn't normally do.
Cool. I have with me here Paul Dorival, prolific automotive builder and great supporter of the Workbench Hobbies channel, so your support is greatly appreciated, mate.
No problem at all.
And part of this missile group build. So congratulations for expanding your boundaries and having a crack at that. It's I think, guys like yourself, putting yourself out of the comfort zone is what this hobby's all about.
Yeah, it was a bit of a stretch not having any anything to polish to a shiny finish or racing stripes. But no, it was a good little exercise and doing something a little bit different.
Yeah.
You know, like all kits, there was little challenges, but it was a lot of fun. And on to the next one.
If you had to take one learning out of that kit, what do you think it would be? Sorry to put you on the spot.
That is putting me on the spot. Probably consider different options for when I'm gluing some of the parts, because I had a lot of trouble putting the rails together.
Yeah, it's a little bit fiddly, yeah.
And then after I got them together and said I had a lot of trouble with it, you gave us the advice of how you did it.
Yep.
But that would have been helpful earlier.
Yeah, okay, sorry. Oh, that's good, mate. Well, I appreciate you joining in, and you've got your participation ring. There you go. And yeah, the next group build subject should be a little more up your alley.
Oh, definitely.
Beautiful. Appreciate it again, mate.
No,
well done.
Thank you very much.
And congratulations.
No problem. Thank
See
you,
mate. So here we are. Pete Davis, president of the ACT.
Yeah, Scout Modelers Society.
Absolutely, and good mate, and a participant in the missile group build. You got it on the table, mate. Well done. Congratulations.
A couple of days before, but
now, complete honesty, cards on the table. Did you enjoy this build?
yeah, I did. I do have an interest. Oh yeah, a little bit. I don't know. It was I don't know. To start with, it was a bit sort of I don't know,
an obscure
subject, definitely. But it, mostly sort of doing armor building most of the time too, like a bit like yourself, what you were saying in your YouTube and stuff. You had to tone it back a little bit, and,
absolutely, and
all that sort of stuff. But managed to find a bit of an interesting reference photo with.
Absolutely.
Yeah, some with rust oil paint and stuff on it to try and make it a bit different from everyone else's.
What do you reckon you learnt out of this build? I always try to learn something with every build I do.
Yeah, so probably had to go with the MIG shaders. So a bit of play around with those. Haven't really had a chance to use those.
Okay.
To try and break up, it's very grey, the whole structure and stuff, just to break up the tonal variation and whatever. So
nice.
It was running a bit short on time, so normally I'd probably use oils, but didn't have the drying time, so I gave these acrylic shaders a run. And,
cool.
It went all right. It went really well. Yeah,
and your figure's a nice touch as well.
Yeah,
out of the TAKOM kit, is it?
Yeah, it was out of
the
early object something,
whatever
it was back when TAKOM kind of kicked off. Kind of just sitting there in the drawer, and
it's a nice touch.
Yeah.
Cool. Well, thanks, mate. Thanks for your support. Thanks for your participation and all you bring to the hobby.
Yeah, thank you.
Good
Cheers.
on you. See you, mate.
See you, everyone.
Obviously, congratulations on getting your missile on the table.
Thank you.
Did you enjoy the whole group build concept?
Oh, look, my enjoyment level wavered through the whole process. But the bit that I really enjoyed was when we were talking about, I wanted to do something a bit different with the missile, make it vertically, make it coming up out of the deck. And you said, well, why don't you design it in 3D?
Inspirational.
That would be a good project.
So I sort of previewed that on the build video of the work you did, and that was outstanding. And I guess I've been asking guys what they've learnt from this thing, and that's clearly your big learning out of this.
Definitely.
Venture into 360.
It's got me over that hump of, can I do this? It's going to be too complex for me. And this has taught me that it's within my grasp.
Yeah.
And, I'm really happy with the results. It's not perfect, but as a first attempt, it's
pretty freaking close.
I'm really happy. And now I'm really, really excited at what the potential for this is. Because, as you know, I mean, I think all of us that are in the hobby, we would like to design our own parts and print them, because printers are not that expensive anymore.
No,
really.
absolutely not.
Really within the reach of most modelers. And the designing part is you can, rather than scratch building with plastic card or copper wire, you can now do it digitally in the computer and make it real in the real world with your printer. So
I just love the fine detail you got on those lift hooks around the edge, just with the holes there. It was an outstanding job. I love it.
Yeah, thank you.
And for such a left of center subject, like, it just looks awesome.
Always looking for the angles, aren't we?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
You nailed it. And congratulations on your participation, being part of the group, and what you put on the table.
I don't have my ring, but
well done, mate.
Thank you.
Congratulations.
Really enjoyed it.